At a biker fundraiser buzzing with music and families, no one noticed the man adjusting his jacket, except 11-year-old Calvin. He saw a symbol buried in the lining, one he wasn't supposed to recognize. But when he tried to warn someone, they laughed it off. What would you do if no one believed you? And you were right. The fundraiser felt like a fairground. Engines growled as bikers rolled in, lining their bikes like chrome trophies beneath rows of fluttering banners. The sun was out. Music blared from rented speakers. Food trucks steamed on one side of the lot while families drifted between booths for raffle tickets and barbecue. It was the kind of day where nobody expected anything to go wrong. 11-year-old Calvin Turner sat on a folding chair next to the registration table, kicking his feet in slow rhythm. His mom, Tess, handled the sign-ins, her green volunteer vest marked with the logo of the local biker club, the ones who organized the whole event to raise money for a local veteran center. She looked busy. Everyone looked busy. Everyone but Calvin. He'd already wandered the booths twice, gotten a soda, watched a toddler lick mustard off a corn dog, and helped an elderly man find the raffle table. Now he was just waiting for the afternoon to pass. That's when he saw it. A man leaned forward near one of the food trucks, adjusting his jacket. His movement wasn't odd, but what flashed from inside the lining was a partial emblem, just a fragment of thread in the shape of something curved and sharp, stitched beneath the surface fabric. Not a patch, not a club logo. This was something buried, intentional, meant to stay hidden. And it stirred something deep in Calvin's mind. He blinked. The man stood up and tugged his jacket closed, looking around casually. Nothing aggressive. He walked over to another man by the drinks tent, scratched behind his ear, then made a small gesture with his left hand, flicking 2 fingers toward his wrist, then down to his side. The other man barely nodded, as if nothing had happened. But Calvin had seen everything. His heart picked up. He didn't run. He didn't scream. Instead, he moved quickly toward the uniformed police officer leaning against a cooler, halfway through a hot dog. "Excuse me," Calvin said, voice low. The officer glanced down, surprised but not unkind. "Hey there, buddy. Need help finding someone?" "I saw something weird," Calvin replied. A man's jacket had a stitched emblem on the inside. It looked like an old one I've seen before. He made a signal to another guy, kind of like this. He mimicked the subtle hand movement. And then they looked around like they were checking for something. The officer smiled and took another bite of his hot dog. "You've got quite an imagination, huh?" Calvin hesitated. "No, I'm serious. I think it's—" "Hey, listen," the officer interrupted, raising a hand gently. "You watch a lot of detective shows? Spy movies?" Calvin didn't answer. "Bet you do," the man chuckled. "Listen, you're safe here. This is a family event. Probably someone showing off some inside joke patch. Nothing to worry about." The boy stood still for a moment. The officer had already turned his attention to someone asking about parking. Calvin stepped back and walked away, embarrassed. He tried again. Another officer stood near the raffle tent. This one had sunglasses and a clipboard. "Sir," Calvin said carefully, "I saw something strange. A symbol inside someone's jacket. It looked like an old emblem that—" "You got a picture?" the officer asked, barely glancing up. "No, but I saw it clearly. Look, kid. I'm sure you mean well," he said, voice distracted. "But we've got volunteers and security all around. Enjoy the event, okay?" This time, Calvin didn't reply. He simply walked back to the registration table. He sat down quietly, feeling that sinking feeling in his stomach. The one that said, "You were right and no one cares." A breeze passed through the lot, carrying the scent of grilled onions and engine oil. Kids were chasing bubbles near the bounce house. Somewhere behind the stage, someone was revving a bike for the upcoming stunt demo. The world kept moving, unaware that a threat might be standing just a few feet away. That was when Tess looked over. "You okay?" she asked. Calvin didn't answer at first, but something in his eyes made her put down the clipboard. "What happened?" she asked, voice soft. "I saw something," Calvin said, "and I tried to tell the cops, but they didn't listen." Tess leaned in, suddenly serious. "Tell me what you saw." "Exactly." Calvin looked up at her. She wasn't humoring him. She was listening. He told her everything, the emblem inside the jacket, the way it flashed for just a second. The hand signal. The man it was directed to. The way both officers dismissed it. He described the curve of the symbol, how it reminded him of something he'd seen before. Something older, meant to pass unnoticed. When he finished, Tess didn't respond right away. She looked at him, really looked at him. How long was the emblem visible? Half a second. But it was real. What color was the thread? Dark red, kind of faded, like it used to be bright. Where exactly was it stitched? Inside the left panel. Not where it'd be seen unless he leaned forward. She stared into the crowd, then back at him. Something shifted behind her eyes. Tension. Okay, she said, standing. Come with me. Calvin blinked. Wait, what? If the police won't listen, Tess said quietly. Maybe the people being watched will. Calvin followed her, unsure. But deep down, a strange current of relief began to rise. Someone believed him. They crossed the lot side by side, Tess walking with purpose, Calvin one step behind, unsure what his mother planned but certain she wasn't brushing him off. Around them, the fundraiser continued like nothing had happened. A young girl squealed with delight as she won a stuffed bear from the ring toss. A biker in a leather vest lifted a toddler onto a custom-painted trike for photos. The air smelled like sun-warmed metal and cotton candy. But Tess wasn't smiling anymore. She scanned the rows of tents until her eyes landed on a corner booth where the senior members of the club were gathered. Men in worn denim and sun-creased vests, some laughing over coffee, others checking in on volunteers. Calvin had seen them earlier from a distance. Now, up close, they looked older than he'd expected. Real people, not the intimidating giants the movies made them out to be. Tess nodded toward a tall man with streaks of silver in his beard and a slight limp in his gait. His vest read "Hollow" in stitched block letters. He was speaking with a vendor but turned when he saw Tess approach. "Miss Turner," Hollow greeted her with the slow, polite drawl of someone who measured his words. "Something wrong?" Tess gestured to Calvin. "My son saw something I think you need to hear." Hollow's expression didn't change, but he tilted his head slightly. "Go ahead, kid." Calvin hesitated. The moment felt heavier than it had with the police. Hollow wasn't brushing him off. He wasn't smiling either. So Calvin took a breath and spoke clearly, repeating what he'd seen. The symbol, where it was placed, the thread color, the movement of the jacket, the hand signal exchanged. He even described the cut of the stranger's beard and the way he chewed the corner of his lip while scanning the area. Every detail flowed out, fast but precise, as if he'd practiced it. And he had, just not out loud. At the mention of the thread color and emblem placement, Hollow's jaw tensed. He didn't say anything, but something changed in his posture. Another biker nearby, shorter, bald, with dark sunglasses, shifted his weight and walked off without a word, already tapping his phone. Tess noticed it too. "You recognize the symbol?" she asked. Hollow didn't answer immediately. He stared out across the crowd, then looked down at Calvin. "How old are you, kid?" 11. "And you saw all that?" "Yes, sir." Hollow nodded once, slowly. "You watch a lot of TV?" Calvin flinched, the question too close to what the officers had asked. But Hollow's tone was different. Not dismissive. Curious. "Yeah," Calvin replied. "Old shows. Investigative ones. There was this segment once on how criminal groups hide identifiers to avoid detection. They said they use recycled symbols from older outfits. Stuff law enforcement might overlook because it's technically outdated. That's where I saw the shape." Hollow's eyes narrowed. He leaned closer. "You said the thread was faded red?" Calvin nodded. "Like it had been through a few washes." Hollow exhaled through his nose. "That wasn't just a symbol. It was a ghost flag. Last time I saw one stitched like that, we buried a man who didn't deserve the ending he got." Tess frowned. "A what?" "Used to be worn by a crew up north. Not around anymore officially. But their tag was that off-angle hook you just described, always stitched on the inside, always red. Never worn openly unless things were about to go loud." He looked off again. "Last time I saw it. Wasn't good." Calvin stood very still. "It's recon," Hollow muttered. "They're testing the water." Tess stepped closer. What does that mean for this place? For today? It means we stop smiling and start moving quiet, Hollow replied, already walking. And I owe your boy a hell of a thank you. They didn't make a scene. No sirens, no shouting. Just subtle shifts. A few men disappeared behind the clubhouse. One started speaking to food truck vendors with quiet urgency. Hollow moved with a phone pressed to his ear, speaking in clipped, deliberate tones. Calvin and Tess stood off to the side as the mood of the event gently shifted. Nothing obvious, just a drop in background noise, a few heads turning toward exits. The weather hadn't changed, but the air felt heavier. You didn't hesitate, Tess said softly, kneeling beside her son. I knew I wasn't wrong, Calvin whispered back. But no one believed me. I did. He looked at her. She placed a hand on his shoulder. You know why? Calvin shook his head. When I was your age, I told someone I thought a neighbor was stealing from his job. He'd bragged about it to the older kids when he thought no one was listening. I told a teacher. She laughed. Said I misunderstood. Tessa's eyes darkened. 2 weeks later, he got caught trying to sell stolen electronics to a pawn shop. They realized it had been going on for months. She paused. I've never forgotten what it felt like. To see something, to be right, and to be dismissed just because I was a kid. Calvin's voice cracked. So you believed me? Because you knew how it felt? No, Tess said, brushing his hair aside. I believed you because I know you. You don't make things up. And when your voice changes like that, when you speak with that much precision, I'd be a fool not to listen. Calvin looked down at his shoes. I thought maybe I was just weird. The stuff I watch, the things I remember. Most people think it's useless. It's not, she said. Not today. Later, Hollow returned, wiping sweat from his brow. Confirmed, he said. Those two you saw? Not in our lists. No ties to the local chapters. Their vans got plates from out of state, probably rented. One of them's using an alias tied to a drop site from a few years back. A place we'd hoped to never hear about again. Tessa's breath caught. So they were planning something? Looks like a supply handoff. Something small but dirty. We're locking it down now. He looked at Calvin. You saved a lot of people some hurt, kid. You ever need anything, you come here. Calvin didn't know what to say, but Hollow wasn't finished. He crouched slightly, lowering his voice. You've got an eye most people never develop. Don't ever let someone make you doubt it. Then he stood and walked off, calling out instructions as his crew closed the last gaps. Calvin stood in place for a while, stunned. That day had started like so many others on the sidelines. But now, he wasn't invisible anymore. The fundraiser didn't stop, but it changed. To anyone watching casually, it still looked like a normal afternoon. Music played. Kids laughed. Engines revved now and then for photos. But beneath the surface, the rhythm had shifted. Conversations shortened. Volunteers repositioned tables. A few bikers quietly took posts near the entrances, their relaxed stances now deliberate, watchful. Calvin noticed everything. He stayed close to his mother as Hollow's crew moved with an ease that suggested long practice. No radios crackled. No one raised their voice. Instructions passed with brief eye contact and nods, like a language the crowd couldn't hear. Hollow crossed the lot again, this time joined by 2 other senior members. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with weathered hands, unfolded a piece of paper on a crate. Calvin saw a rough map sketched in marker. The lot, the clubhouse, the road behind the trees. They're still here, the man said quietly. Both of them. Good, Hollow replied. That means they think they're invisible. Calvin felt a chill at the word. From their position near the registration tent, he could see the 2 men he'd first noticed. They hadn't left. One stood near the merchandise booth, pretending to browse shirts. The other lingered close to the tree line, phone in hand, gaze sweeping the lot in slow intervals. Recon, Hollow had called it. What happens now? Tess asked, her voice low. Now we confirm intent, Hollow said, without tipping them off. He motioned to another biker, a younger man in a plain vest with no visible patch. Shadow the one by the trees. Keep distance. I want to know who he talks to. The man nodded and disappeared into the crowd. Calvin watched, his heart thudding. He hadn't imagined things. He hadn't misunderstood. Everything he'd noticed mattered, and now adults were acting on it. A few minutes passed. Then 10. The younger biker returned, leaning in close to Hollow. Tree Guy made a call. Short. Used a burner. Mentioned timing and after sundown. He also asked if the host location was still clean. Hollow's jaw tightened. That's enough, he said. They're not here to donate. He turned to Tess. Ma'am, I need you and your son to step inside the clubhouse for a bit. Just routine. Tess nodded without argument, placing a protective hand on Calvin's back as they moved away from the open lot. Inside the clubhouse, the noise dulled. The walls were lined with old photographs, rides, memorials, faces Calvin didn't recognize. Some smiling, some solemn. One picture caught his eye. A younger Hollow, arms slung around another biker whose face had been scratched out recently. The marks sharp, the glass still faintly smudged, as if someone had stood there not long ago. You're wondering about him, Hollow said from behind. Calvin turned. Who was that? Hollow followed his gaze. A brother. Died because we trusted the wrong silence. Seeing that old symbol again today made it impossible to keep pretending the past was settled. He didn't elaborate. From inside, they could still hear the faint hum of the fundraiser outside. But now there was something else layered beneath it, movement, purpose. A biker entered quietly and spoke to Hollow in a whisper. Hollow nodded once, then pulled out his phone. I've got a contact who listens when I call, he said, more to Tess than Calvin. Not everyone wears a uniform. Some just remember old debts. He stepped aside, voice low but firm. Calvin caught fragments, locations, descriptions, timing. No speculation, just facts. After the call ended, Hollow returned, expression steady. They're making their move tonight, he said. Off-site. This event was just a screen. Calvin swallowed. So, if I hadn't seen the symbol, Hollow held up a hand, then we'd be reacting later. And that's always worse. Silence settled between them. Outside, one of the suspicious men glanced toward the clubhouse doors. His eyes lingered a second too long. Hollow noticed. All right, he said. We closed the net. What followed wasn't dramatic. No tackles. No shouting. Two bikers struck up casual conversations with the men, steering them away from the crowd under the pretense of raffle logistics. Another vehicle quietly blocked the rear exit. Someone unplugged the music near the far tent, creating just enough disruption to draw attention elsewhere. Within minutes, the men realized they weren't as free as they thought. From a narrow window inside, Calvin watched as Hollow spoke to one of them. Calm. Controlled. The man tried to laugh it off. Tried to bluff. It didn't work. A short while later, an unmarked car rolled in from the back road. No lights, just presence. The men were escorted away without resistance. The fundraiser continued. Inside the clubhouse, Tess finally exhaled. A breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Calvin leaned against the wall, legs weak. Not from fear now, but from the weight of it all settling in. Hollow approached him one last time. You trusted your instincts when it mattered, he said. Most adults don't. Calvin looked up. They didn't listen at first. No, Hollow agreed. But you didn't stop talking. He gestured toward the door, where sunlight spilled back into the room. That's what made the difference. Calvin stepped outside again, the noise and color of the fundraiser washing over him. Everything looked the same, but he knew better now, and so did they. The sun dipped low behind the tree line as the last raffle numbers were called. Most of the families had packed up, kids with painted faces tugging tired parents toward the parking lot, volunteers stacking chairs into neat towers. The fundraiser wound down like a summer song coming to its final verse. From a distance, no one would have guessed what had almost happened. There were no arrests in front of the crowd, no news vans, no loud confrontations. The two men Calvin had identified were gone, escorted by quiet allies to a separate location, where real law enforcement, the kind that didn't laugh at children's warnings, waited. Inside the clubhouse, Hollow lit a cigarette with steady hands and leaned against the doorframe, watching the dusk settle over the now quiet lot. Calvin sat on the steps beside him, legs dangling. His sneakers were scuffed from the hours he'd spent walking and waiting, but he didn't mind. "So," Calvin said after a long silence, "what happens now?" Hollow exhaled, the smoke curling upward like a question. "Now, a few phone calls get made. Some people in suits pretend they already knew what was going on. Reports get filed. And hopefully, the shipment those guys were prepping never reaches the road." Calvin nodded slowly. "But there's no article, right? No headline." Hollow glanced down. "Nope. That's kinda unfair. The ones that matter don't get headlines. They just save lives quietly." Hollow muttered. Tess stepped out from the clubhouse, a water bottle in one hand and her phone in the other. She sat on Calvin's other side, placing the bottle between them. "I got a call from Officer Dawn," she said. Calvin perked up. He heard about what happened, that you'd spotted something real. He didn't say sorry, exactly, but he said you saw what they missed. That means something. Calvin blinked. He said that, sort of, in cop language. Tess smiled faintly. It was hard for him to admit. Hollow gave a short laugh. Some people need proof burned into their boots before they believe fire exists. Another biker stepped out from the shadows behind the clubhouse. Same one who'd quietly followed one of the suspects earlier. He handed Hollow a folded sheet of paper. Hollow opened it, nodded, and handed it to Tess without a word. She read it once, then again. "What is it?" Calvin asked. Tess hesitated. "It's the cargo list. Notes on weapons transfers, pickup points, dates. It was found in the back of their van." Calvin's stomach turned cold. "So it really was going to happen?" "Yes," Hollow said. "And probably not just here. But thanks to you, it didn't." The words landed heavy, even though Calvin had already suspected it. Now there was no doubt. He had stopped something real, and no one else had even seen it. As night fell, the remaining bikers gathered inside the clubhouse. It wasn't a party, but there was a sense of quiet solidarity. Sandwiches were passed around. A pot of coffee brewed in the corner. The tension had lifted, but something else filled the room now. A recognition of how close things had come. Calvin stayed near the wall, half listening as Hollow spoke to a few of the older members. "I keep thinking about that time in Trenton," one of them said. "The way we missed the signs back then. I still see the smoke sometimes." "Exactly," Hollow muttered. "But this time, we caught it before the fire." Calvin didn't speak, but his chest swelled just a little. Across the room, someone handed him a small black patch. He turned it over. It wasn't the club's official patch. Just a simple symbol. An open eye stitched in silver thread. Underneath, one word, Watcher. "What's this?" Calvin asked, glancing up. The biker grinned. "Something we don't hand out often. It's not official. Just something we use when someone sees what others miss. I'm not even in the club. You don't have to be. You saw the threat. You acted. That's what matters." Calvin looked at the patch again, fingers curling around it slowly. "Thanks." He tucked it into his pocket like it was made of gold. He didn't know if he'd ever wear it, but in that moment it felt heavier than any metal. Later, as they walked to the car, Tess glanced at him. "You're quiet." Calvin shrugged. "I'm just thinking. About." He paused before answering. "It wasn't just the symbol, or the jacket. I wanted to prove to myself that paying attention mattered. That all that stuff I watch, all the weird facts I remember, they weren't just noise. They never were. I know that now." They reached the car. Tess unlocked the doors and turned to him before he climbed in. "You know," she said softly, "some people spend their whole lives trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for them. You never have to do that. The way your mind works is a gift, even if others don't see it right away." Calvin nodded slowly. Then, "Can I keep watching those old investigation shows?" She laughed. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." As they pulled away, Calvin looked out the window one last time. The banners had come down. The lot was mostly empty, but he didn't feel small or overlooked anymore. Somewhere in the dark, someone dangerous had failed because he noticed something no one else did. And that was enough. It wasn't about a trophy, or having his name shouted into a microphone. But because next time, if there ever was a next time, he'd know he could trust himself. And whether they did or not, he'd be ready. This story reminds us that warnings don't always come from the loudest voices. Sometimes, the quietest ones carry the most truth. What would you do if your child said something felt off, but no one else listened? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey. See you in the next video.